In 2009, Mitrice Richardson was released from the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff's Station, and she never made it home. Nearly a year later, Mitrice's remains were found in a canyon 6 miles from the station. Her death is Malibu's greatest unsolved mystery. I'm Dana Goodyear. In Lost Hills, Dark Canyon, what happened to Mitrice Richardson? Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
The following contains material that isn't suitable for all audiences. The story you're about to hear is part of an active and ongoing investigation. If you have information to share, reach out to your local FBI field office or visit tips.fbi.gov. Listener discretion is advised.
Tupper Lake is on the other side of Lake Champlain.
Tupper Lake is not far from that reservoir where I buried the guns last time.
So the bank robbery was on the same trip that you're talking about, that there's going to be remains in New York?
Yeah. I had a rental car. It was a bank robbery. It was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was in the spring. There's not a lot of traffic on those roads anyway, but I remember that particular day there was hardly any traffic. So I just decided to park out on the main road. Just stopped 100 yards from the bank that was right on the main road, and had my car parked out of sight from the bank and walked to the bank. Honestly, I think I only read 1 or 2 stories on that. And then I never checked up on it after that, so I don't know if they ever found out, what car or whatever.
You only read a couple stories on the bank robbery or the missing person or the remains?
I only read a couple stories on the bank robbery.
Was the missing person, was that make the news at all?
There was some stuff.
So there was some news about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the money, so you got about 10 grand. Do you ever bury the money, or you just...
I did bury some of that, but that was buried in a different spot than where I buried the guns.
On the surface, Israel Keyes storming into that bank in Tupper Lake, New York in April of 2009 seems just like another piece of his signature mayhem. But that scene is just the midpoint of a sort of crime spasm.
One that involves a missing person from New Jersey before and the burying of a new kill kit after. A kill kit he returns to just a couple of years later.
A kill kit that contains a gun that gets used in an abandoned farmhouse on a rainy night in Essex, Vermont. The story of Israel Keyes is an unfinished novel, a riddle that's unsolved, and it may be unsolvable.
Over the last few episodes, we've laid out what he's confessed to, what he did and how he did it. But there are still things that we know he did that he hasn't confessed to.
And things we think he did, but won't talk about. This is our trail of maybes.
And we're about to take our first steps.
We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good. Some of us are wired for bad. But a select few step outside all of society's boundaries. From cold open media, this is Deviant. Israel Keyes, Part 5. Welcome back to Deviant, the show where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what humans are capable of. I'm Dan Semitovich.
And I'm Andrew Iden. And before we get started, we just wanted to say thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate your support and you listening. If you haven't, make sure to hit the follow button so you've always got the latest episode downloaded and ready to go. And you can follow us on social. We're on TikTok and Instagram at deviant.podcast. And finally, check out our Patreon. It's free to join, and you'll get some access to great bonus material on all the stories we cover, and an invite to our Discord channel where you can chat with our team. So go to patreon.com/deviantpodcast.
In the last episode of Deviant, we left off with Israel Keyes sitting in a jail in Alaska, with investigators beginning the process of figuring out how many more murders, sexual assaults, burglaries, and arsons have his name on them.
So far, he's confessed to 3 murders: Bill and Lorraine Currier in 2011 and Samantha Koenig in 2012. Israel said it's much more, and police have every reason to believe him.
They know about the kill kits. They know about the planning. They know about the travel. They know the details of what he does to people. They've heard his confession to the Currier murders, and they've seen Samantha Koenig's remains and what was done to her. What they don't know is who else he did those things to, and when, and where. The crimes of Israel Keyes go far beyond Bill and Lorraine and Samantha, but at this point, that's all authorities could see of the big picture.
Authorities are now negotiating with Keyes, trying to pry new information out of him, stuff they can verify and use to start filling in that picture. We've said before that the FBI believes he killed 11 people, but we haven't really gotten into why they think 11 is the number. It came from a completely bonkers discovery. A couple of months before Keyes commits suicide, a check of his jail cell turns up a series of 12 separate drawings. And these drawings, they weren't in pen, they weren't in pencil or paint. They were in Israel Keyes' own blood. One of them appears to depict the head of a goat inside an inverted pentagram ringed by a circle.
The other 11 drawings are of skulls. They're drawn in different shapes and sizes. Whether that's intentional or not, it's hard to tell. But each of those 11 skulls also has an inverted crucifix drawn on their foreheads. And one of those skulls has words under it, "We are one."
It's believed that these 12 drawings were meant to go together. For investigators like FBI Special Agent Jolene Godin, this was a big break.
I do think that the 11 skulls represent potentially 11 victims in this case. And he seemed genuinely kind of angry that we found them. I think at some point, I think he knew we were going to find them, but I don't think he was ready for us to find them. We would ask questions in different ways to try to narrow down the number of victims. And so we're pretty confident with 11. However, he would make kind of the comments also, Canadians don't count or things like that.
It's in an unrecorded conversation that Keyes drops that nugget. Canadians don't count. People who are there say he then laughs that laugh.
That would suggest that it could be more.
He laughed.
Former Anchorage Police Detective Jeff Bell.
I do believe that was a joke. I mean, but at the same time, we have to take everything from him as that, we're talking to a psychopath who kills people. I don't know why he would say less than 12 and write those drawings if there were others, but I don't know, because we did have some trips into Canada, and so that's kind of where that questioning was coming from. He just kind of said Canadians don't count and laughed about it. I didn't take it all that serious, but who knows?
We did reach out to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada, and they told us.
The BC RCMP investigated the possible involvement of Israel Keyes with respect to our unsolved missing and murdered persons cases. However, there was no evidence to link him to any of those investigations.
I think we're pretty confident that there were 11 victims in the United States.
We know who 4 of those victims are.
1 and 2 are Bill and Lorraine Currier of Essex, Vermont. Number 3 is Samantha Koenig of Anchorage, Alaska. And number 4, Deborah Feldman of Hackensack, New Jersey. It's the first time you've heard her name in this series, and she is another life taken. We'll tell her story later in this episode.
For now, though, we're going on the same journey as investigators, piecing together what we can, and when these Israel Keyes episodes of Deviant are through, come to our own conclusions. So let's get to it. Investigators believe that Israel started killing sometime after July of 2001, shortly after he finished the final phase of his transformation into self-acceptance, his time in the U.S. Army.
The timeline of his life, it seems, is defined in 2 parts: who he is and what he thinks before the Army and after. Service in the military changes a lot of people. It can build character, integrity, discipline.
But Keyes wasn't a lot of people, and his experience in the Army builds the launchpad for all that would come after.
Like I say, eventually I think you and your investigators are not going to find anybody in my past, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 Army guys, that is going to have any suspicion whatsoever that I am the other person that I am.
In July of 1998, not long after his family moved east from Colville, Israel Keyes walks into a recruiting station in Albany, New York, and enlists in the Army. And after basic training, he becomes an 11 Charlie 10, an infantry mortarman. By most accounts, he's an excellent soldier in a squad of loose cannons. He deploys to quite a few places, among them Sharm el-Sheikh, the Egyptian resort town on the Sinai Peninsula.
Now keep in mind, Israel was insulated from the outside world for most of his life, so this entire experience is a big epiphany for him.
There's just a lot of stuff that happened when I was in the Army that changed my perspective on things. Went to Egypt and just changed completely. Having never been outside of the United States up until that point, it just really changed my perspective on the big picture and made me realize that, if that was what I wanted to do, then I should just do it.
If you wanted to kill somebody.
Yeah, because all the stuff I had been so concerned about before didn't really matter that much. I guess you could say I just kind of came to terms with myself for the reasons why I wanted to do it.
He starts experimenting. Former squad mates tell investigators stories of sex workers fleeing his room in terror. Once, while on leave in Israel the country, Israel the person says,
there was a girl that I met, I think it was when I was in Tel Aviv. She was pretty young. She was a student. She was Turkish, but I think she was from she was a Norwegian exchange student or something. I wouldn't say that was like an outright rape because we were hanging out and stuff, and she allowed herself to be, it was in her room. She told me where her room was and stuff. And I was gonna, I almost, I did lose control a little bit as things progressed. And that's when I realized that if I was going to do that kind of stuff it had to just be complete strangers from then on. It couldn't be anyone who knew me or who had seen me around the person. Or the whole thing that happened in Oregon freaked me out because I could almost see the beach from where I worked every day, and it was just too close to home.
When he says that whole thing in Oregon, he's talking about the story he told in part 2 of this series, the one where he claims to have sexually assaulted a girl he pulled off her inner tube as she was floating down the Deschutes River with friends.
I just realized that if I kept doing stuff like that, it was only a matter of time before I got caught. I don't know, after that happened in Tel Aviv, I just got really careful and decided for one thing that I wasn't going to do anything when I was in the Army because they always had tabs on me. They always knew where I was. If we were in Tel Aviv or Eilat or, somewhere in Israel, my buddies were usually just right around the corner. And then it was pretty much the same thing when I was in Washington. When I was stationed in Washington, I had my own truck and stuff, and I would go to Eastern Washington sometimes, but for the most part, they always knew where I was, and I just realized I had to kind of chill out and not do anything.
He never actually gets specific about what it is that changes him while he's in the Army, but he does say it profoundly changes his perspective. Mary Ellen O'Toole has some ideas on what all this means. As a former member of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, she's made a career of interpreting the behavior of serial sexual offenders just like Keyes.
You've heard her voice in previous episodes.
That statement is actually, that he made to investigators, is actually remarkably insightful. There probably is a lot of truth to that. That was the point where he made that transition to thinking about it, ruminating over it, reading about it, and then crossing the line into actually acting out.
So he bounces around the globe a while, going from post to post, and then in early 2001, Keyes ends up stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State. It's there that he meets a woman, and they begin dating. He's 23, she's a bit older, and it gets serious pretty quickly. As soon as he's discharged from the Army that July, he decides to move to where she is, to start a new life with her, and a new secret life for him. This is a big moment. Israel Keyes has left the military and is no longer bound by its discipline, its order, its rules. He has a full understanding of who he is, and like he said earlier, he's ready to do things just to do them.
For the most part, when I was in the Army, I got in less trouble when I was in the Army than pretty much any other time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it didn't take long after I got out. It was there were a few months. I had a DUI when I was in the Army right before I got out, so there were a few months there where I was trying not to drive because I didn't want to get busted again for driving on a suspended license, and it was on unemployment, so I just spent a lot of time sitting around, and that's always what would start it up for me.
What, just sitting around? Just
sitting around and reading stuff. Or
what kind of stuff were you reading?
Just that kind of thing, like serial killer stuff, and slasher movies and all that stuff that I'd always been into, but when I sit around and do it, it just gets to where I just get really restless and feel like I have to do something.
So how long?
Hence the branding.
The
Branding works for a while.
How long until you got out of the Army? How long after that did you last?
Not very long. And then I got another job, and that kept me stable most of the time. But
That's the one at Neah Bay?
yeah.
Look, Dan, you and I disagree on a lot of things, right?
But we also agree on a lot of things. You like baseball.
Right. We like a good whiskey.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Oh, God, I hope not.
But also, I think one of the things we both can agree on is that we love Quince. Look, there's a million places where you can get things on the internet.
Yes.
I mean, it's an endless black hole. But if you go to Quince, that endless black hole may stop. Because when I started shopping at Quince, I found some things I was like, this is exactly what I need. For instance, I just told my wife the other day, I said, we need a new chef's knife. I'm sifting through Quince, and I'm going through the clothes and the luggage. And I was like, wait, there's a great 8-inch chef's knife. And sure enough, I bought one. And it's fantastic.
And I was thinking that I need a new bag for taking Gnocchi on walks. Gnocchi is our Great Dane. He's 150 pounds of pure sweetness. He's a little bit of a neighborhood celebrity. Anyway, when you walk a Great Dane, you need a lot of supplies. And sort of sling bag that I was using for him, a little chintzy. I prefer something higher quality, higher fashion. And I was like, maybe Quince has that. And that's when I ended up picking up the Revive nylon fold-over crossbody bag. And now I have all the space I need, and it looks great. And the best part about it is that it didn't cost me a lot. I was willing to pay more, but all Quince items are really priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd expect to pay for similar brands.
Go to Quince. You're going to find something that you want or something you need, like I did. And you can go to quince.com/deviant for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/deviant to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/deviant. In the summer of 2001, Israel Keys is fresh out of the Army. Back in the Pacific Northwest, he settles with his girlfriend in the small community of Neah Bay, Washington. Neah Bay is about as far as you can get in the northwest corner of America before you get to Canada. It's on the north end of the Makah Reservation, 118 miles from Seattle. Its population, small, nearly 1,000, and mainly indigenous. It's wooded, remote, and beautiful, exactly the kind of place that Israel likes to be. And it doesn't take long for him to find a job with the Makah Reservation Parks and Recreation Department.
He liked his heavy metal. I mean, so do I. We both had really similar tastes in music, but yeah, there was always music going. That was one of the things that we connected on, was our taste in music. You know, we'd start playing music, and I'd be jamming right along with him.
That's Jim Thompson, and Neah Bay is his hometown.
Nowadays, he's a cop in Port Angeles, Washington, not far away.
In early 2002, he's partnered up on the job with Israel Keys.
He seemed to be just another guy. He was a little socially awkward, but outside of that, he seemed to me a normal guy. At the time, he was the only Parks and Recreation person for the tribe. So I got reassigned to that department to work with him. He did coordinate a lot of the installation, like playgrounds, and set up, park benches and community beautification. We'd go out and pick up town, make sure all the stuff that we installed wasn't damaged or whatever, and we'd repair it if it needed to be. He was more than just a coworker, really. He was actually family to me. The lady he married is a close relative of mine.
Yes, the woman that Israel met in the Army and for whom he moved to Neah Bay, they're married for a time, and they have a child together, a little girl.
So you guys are in close quarters a lot.
Yeah, every day.
What kind of vibe did you get from him? What were your impressions of him?
One of the things that I saw in him when I worked with him daily is he was very meticulous in his work. We did a lot of projects. We did a lot of construction work, and it was always right. He knew what he had to do, and he knew how to do it. And he had a plan in his mind on how it should go and what it should look like when it was done. So that was my impression of him working with him. I really kind of admired him for that, that he was really good at what he did. The way he planned things out and the way he went about evading being caught for so long, to me, that really wasn't surprising. His meticulous nature, I think, maybe that didn't come from his carpentry skills. Maybe that came from this other life that he was leading.
I would do something, and then I would go back like business as usual and go out with friends, go out to bars, talk to them, see people, and it was all like a mind game with me. That was all I needed. That was my adrenaline. That's where I got my kicks, I guess, was being able to live two different lives and have no one have a clue. It became even more so when, even like when I was in Neah Bay and had a regular 9-to-5 job basically, and some of the guys I would work with, they'd like to talk shit about how dumb criminals are, and they would talk about this news story or that news story, and I rarely would talk about stuff, and I rarely would drink very much when I was hanging out with friends because I'd be afraid I'd start talking about stuff. So that's always how I got my kicks, I guess, was just being able to look at people while they were talking to me and thinking that for all the years they've known me, they actually don't know me at all, really.
Just as a reminder, the FBI believes he begins accounting for those 11 skulls not long after he gets out of the Army and while he's living in Neah Bay. Here's why.
And you had told us one time that, it wasn't long when you got out of the military that you killed somebody, and it was that sort of feeling that you needed to do something that was hard to resist.
Yeah, Neah Bay was a boring town.
This is where Keyes gets absolutely maddening. In the breadcrumbs he throws out, the murders he says he committed but only partially details.
So if I'm correct about that, that was the murder weapon for one of the Washington murders.
Well, it was involved.
This is something he keeps doing, admitting he killed people, but not saying who he killed or when he killed them. Back in the interrogation room, police are trying to get their arms around all this, and Keyes is only a semi-willing participant.
A couple of husband and wife, do you know?
I'm not going to talk about this.
They zero in on those immediate post-Army years, and Keyes admits that he killed several people in Northwest Washington then.
No, the only person I ever shot was Bill Courier.
Everybody else is strangled.
Yeah.
I don't want to have the wrong impression. Everybody else was strangled, or was there something else?
No, one of the Washington things there was, it wasn't strangling. I hit somebody in the head, so I wasn't trying to kill him. I just took him out of action.
Is it fair to say that we were looking at just the two in Washington?
No, there's a couple. There's a couple in Washington. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, we know that there was a couple in Washington State, a male-female couple. Are those the same couple from that you took to the boat and dumped in the lake? Or are there others?
They went in their hole. They were married. Yeah, that was
a long time ago.
It was before I got the boat.
The boat, Israel-owned in Washington at that time, becomes a point of intense interest to investigators. They found it, they have it, they tear it apart, looking for evidence of the murders he alluded to.
Our understanding is that there was 2 victims that were disposed of by the boat. We've always made the assumption that there were 2 Washington victims, but I don't know if that clarified if we're understanding that correctly or not.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Okay.
There's more detailed on that yet.
Israel's also pretty interested in the boat.
I was mostly curious if they found any blood.
Yeah, there
I
was.
wasn't sure how long, because it's been sitting there in the rain for so long. I was curious. I mean, I know there was when I parked it.
Yeah, there was.
As the conversation about his boat and what he may have done on it unfolds, all of a sudden, Keyes grabs the wheel and he eventually gets to what he wants to talk about. Bodies.
How long does a body last in a freshwater lake? I mean, because there's no critters that eat.
I learned a lot.
Because it depends on deep, the temperature of the water.
And if the body's contained in something.
And it's not critters, it can be
Bacteria.
Yeah. Organisms.
They were talking
So if
about
the water is below, say, 45 degrees all the time, you guys know about Lake Crescent in Washington.
How deep is it?
I think that lake is 500 to 700 feet deep. They've never been to the bottom of it.
Lake Crescent is 59 miles east of Neah Bay. You can find it in Olympic National Park, and it's massive and very deep.
Israel Keyes tells FBI Special Agent Jolene Godin that he took his boat out there and disposed of at least one victim.
I always have been curious. I would think as deep as that lake is, it's probably sitting there just exactly as it was when it first touched down.
But that one's not in anything. It's just ropes or something molded.
Is that the milk jugs?
Well, that's what the weights were.
How many milk jugs?
At least 4 or 5, I would think.
Just for one body?
Yeah.
We asked about if there's a body at the bottom of the lake, what are the chances of that body still being intact 7 years later, or that kind of thing? What are we going to be looking for? And one of the things that they said, which might be of interest to you, is depending on how the body was put down there, it's possible that the body is actually very intact. If the body was just tied to something and dropped it to the bottom of the lake, there's definitely still going to be long bones and that kind of stuff. You won't have finger bones and that kind of stuff. If the body was contained in something, even a bag of some sort, it's very possible that the body could still be intact, depending on the depth of the lake. And so, in terms of the Washington bodies, were they contained in something, or were they just tied to the milk jugs? I mean, is it something where we might possibly actually still get it intact?
No.
No? Okay.
All these potential victims you just heard about have never been found and have never been identified. To tie up everything you just heard about Washington, here's what the FBI said in a 2012 statement shortly after Keyes' suicide.
Keyes admitted to murdering 4 people in Washington. He killed 2 people, independent of each other, sometime during 2005 and 2006, and murdered a couple in Washington between 2001 and 2005. It is unknown if these victims were residents of Washington or if they were vacationing in Washington but resided in another state. It's also possible that Keyes abducted them from a nearby state and transported them to Washington.
But going back to the 11 skulls, this gives us 4 confirmed known victims and 4 unconfirmed unknown victims. That's 8, which leaves us with 3 that we can't yet account for. But let's talk about one we can account for. Let's talk about Deborah Feldman.
If we've learned anything at this point, it's that the Keyes case, its victims, its timelines, it's all very dense. Lots of moving parts. His 4th known victim, though, she's one of the people who's often overlooked in this case. This is how the discovery of her came to be.
If you tell me there's this many bodies in New York, then I can take that and say we've got something solid.
This is another one of those long periods of silence. You know what's happening here. Keyes' wheels are turning. The others in the room are silently waiting. 5 minutes later.
There's one in New York.
Okay, so we can tell them that there's a body in New York.
Yeah, there's remains in New York.
But is it somebody from New York, or is it that's just where the remains are?
That's where the remains are.
But not a New Yorker.
I'm not going to go into that part.
The revelation of remains, a 4th victim, isn't caught on surveillance video like Samantha Koenig. It isn't laid out in minute detail like the Courier's. Her name, Deborah Feldman, was found by Detective Jeff Bell.
He knew we were only going to find out about the Couriers and Samantha because he knew those were on his computer. I don't think he knew we were going to find out about Deborah Feldman because when I was going through his computer information, I found one search, maybe 2, for a person named Deborah Feldman, who was a person who was missing out of Hackensack, New Jersey. We knew through interviewing him that he had taken somebody in one state, we didn't know which one because he didn't tell us, on the East Coast, and had transported her through at least 2 other states. So we knew that there was somebody that was taken across those lines. And so we presented Deborah Feldman to Israel Keyes during one of our interviews. Based on the way he reacted and some of the things he said, we are confident that Deborah Feldman was one of his victims. And his description of that he took somebody across the states, that she makes the most sense, and that her body was probably disposed of along the Raquette River in Tupper Lake, New York.
Tupper Lake in upstate New York. Sound familiar? You've already heard Keyes describe the bank robbery he committed there. That happened on April 10th, 2009. 2 days before that, on April 8th, and 5 hours away in Hackensack, New Jersey, 48-year-old mother Deborah Feldman goes missing. We don't know a whole lot about her private life. We did reach out to family members, and they didn't want to talk. What we do know is that she was last seen at her house On the night of April 8th, FBI agent Jolene Godin, U.S. Attorney Kevin Feldis, and Detective Bell confront him about Deborah and start chipping away, looking for the truth.
One of the things that we've talked about from the beginning, we're going to keep you posted as to what's happening, so nothing is a surprise. Deborah Feldman, we had talked about her before.
Yeah.
New Jersey is looking into her more. FBI is looking into her more and that situation.
All right.
Thought maybe that'd be a place where we could start.
No. Not as far as I'm concerned. I can't help them if that's what you're asking.
Well, do you know this person?
No.
Is this the person buried in New York?
No.
Do you know where this person is?
No.
Her name was on your computer.
Mine?
Yeah, on your computer.
My laptop?
Tower.
Oh.
I don't understand.
You don't understand why the name was on my computer?
Right.
Well, there's a lot of names on that computer.
Right, but we're talking about this one.
We told you we'd do this, so we'd come back and try to get information from you without going overt to try to get the information. And so we're just trying to hold up our end of the bargain.
If you're referring to the New York trip, I don't know what you mean by going over because there wasn't anybody with me on that. There wasn't.
Okay, well, let's just cut. I just want to come over here with a clear picture. Are you responsible for her death?
No.
Do you know anything about her disappearance?
No.
Why is her name on your computer?
I don't know. Probably because I looked it up.
Well, just explain so we're not sitting here wondering.
No, I'm not going to talk about what's on the computer. I don't know what you want me to do.
In terms of this, they're going to start asking questions, is basically what it comes down to. With Deborah, New Jersey FBI is asking questions, basically, because it fits. It fits, the date fits, the place fits, a number of things fit, and the fact that she's on your computer. So, hypothetically,
right.
If this were a victim, we're just asking for, are they on the right track? Are they not on the right track?
No, I didn't kill her.
But then, 10 minutes later, in that same interrogation,
There's something more to the story, just so I'm clear. There's something more to the story of Deborah that you're just don't want to tell us now.
I just don't want to talk about it.
But I'm right about that.
Yeah.
so in a short space of time, Keyes says he didn't do it, and then, maybe they're onto something. What's going on here? Well, remember what Mary Ellen O'Toole said back in episode 2 about serial killers always lying?
The lying allows them to control the conversation. It allows them to control the situation. And it allows them to be very dominant. And what's so interesting is a lot of offenders will lie to you when you're in an interview room. But a psychopath will lie about everything and even things that they don't have to lie about. It's pathological. It's not just your typical lying. It's at the pathological level.
So whatever Israel's trying to do here, the fact of the matter is he killed Deborah Feldman on April 8th or April 9th of 2009, buried her remains somewhere around the shores of Tupper Lake, robbed the bank there the next day, and then buried the kill kit that he would use years later on Bill and Lorraine Currier.
We now know all of our confirmed victims, and with hearing about his time in Neah Bay, have a better sense of what else he may have done in those earlier years.
4 confirmed victims: Bill, Lorraine, Samantha, Deborah. And by our count, 4 more probable victims in Washington state. That's 8, but there are more.
Next time on Deviant, it turns out that there's a pretty good chance that Samantha wasn't the final victim of Israel Keyes. You haven't yet heard the full story about his time in Texas.
I was thinking about taking someone I was looking for an abandoned house, and I was looking for out-of-the-way ATMs. I was going to grab somebody from an ATM and take them to the house, but there were a lot of cops in Texas, so I guess I kind of chickened out a little bit on that.
But it turns out that may be a lie too. Until next time, thanks for listening. Deviant is written, produced, and executive produced by Clark Goldband, Dan Semitovich, and me, Andrew Iden. Editorial and production consultation come from the extremely excellent Jenny Ament, with original scoring from the equally excellent Shuvo Sir. Marketing, sales, and distribution support comes from our friends at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.